Montana Territory, September 1881. The locomotive shrieked into the small depot at Fort Benton Station, steam hissing in the cool morning air. Clara Ellsworth stepped down, a carpet satchel clutched tight in her hand. Her chest tightened with each breath. She had never left Missouri before, never traveled this far alone, and certainly never lived beneath the roof of a man not bound to her by family. The thought unsettled her, but she wasn't here for folly. She was here for wages, for survival, and for the faint promise of a new beginning if such a thing could still exist for a woman like her. The telegram had come from a cattleman in need of help with his children. She knew little more than that, just a name, a place, and the promise of honest pay. Clara had no kin left, no husband, no one who cared if she saw another sunrise, so she had said yes. Lifting her chin, she walked toward the hitching rail where a broad-shouldered man waited beside a dun horse. His sleeves were rolled, forearms bronzed by years beneath the sun, his hat casting a long shadow across a face carved with quiet strength. "You Miss Ellsworth?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, I'm Jonah Kincaid." He tipped his hat politely. "I sent the wire." Clara studied him taller than she expected, a square jaw darkened by stubble, hair just beginning to curl over his collar, and eyes the deep gray of riverstone. He looked worn, not from age alone, but from a weight carried in silence. "I did receive it," she said softly. "You mentioned children needing care." Jonah inclined his head. "Their ma passed last winter. I've been trying to run stock and raise 'em both, but I reckon I'm coming up short on all fronts." She didn't ask further. She had seen loss in a man's gaze before, and has carried it heavy. He helped her into the saddle and secured her satchel behind. "You ride much?" "Not often," she admitted. A low chuckle rumbled from him. "Then best hold on." They rode out of town into the wide open country, a sky stretching endlessly overhead. The sun dropped behind the cottonwoods as the ranch came into view, plain but steady. A split log house with smoke trailing from its chimney, a small barn, and fields that rolled toward the horizon. Two children dashed barefoot from the porch at their arrival, a girl of 10, her dark braid swinging against her back, and a boy of 6 with hair the color of wheat and a grin missing a front tooth. "May, Eli," Jonah called. "Come meet Miss Ellsworth." The girl squared her shoulders. "Are you going to be our new mama?" Clara's heart lurched. She knelt to meet the girl's eyes. "No, sweetheart. I'm here to help your father." Eli's brow furrowed. "Mama used to read us stories at night." Clara managed a gentle smile. "Then I suppose I'll do the reading now." The children softened, curiosity warming to something close to hope. The house was simple, clean but worn. Jonah led her to a narrow room at the back, a bed tucked beneath the window. "You'll be comfortable here," he said. She lingered in the doorway, studying him. "You seem a good father." Jonah leaned against the frame, his voice low. "I try, but I know horses better than hair braids." The corner of her mouth lifted her first true smile since stepping from the train. "Then it's a good thing I came." That night, Clara braided May's hair by lamplight, read Eli a psalm, and sat quietly in her room. Her marriage had been brief, cruel, and left her wary. Yet here she was, beginning again. Days fell into a rhythm. Morning chores, sweeping the porch, gathering eggs. May and Eli shadowed her every step, asking endless questions, laughing with a freedom she had nearly forgotten existed. Clara sang while she cooked, patched a torn shirt, and taught May how to read the word grace. Jonah watched her quietly, never intruding but always noticing the way she favored tea, how she kept her shoes neatly brushed, how she tucked her hair behind one ear when lost in thought. One night, a storm rolled across the plains, thunder shaking the walls. Eli woke, screaming. Clara rushed from her bed, gathering him in her arms. "I want Mama," he sobbed. "I know, darling," she whispered. "I know." Jonah appeared in the hall, his face tight with worry. "He's all right now," Clara murmured, holding the boy close. That night, she lay beside Eli until his breathing steadied. Jonah lingered in the doorway, a silent, watchful figure, before finally turning away. Weeks later, a wagon axle snapped on their way back from town. Jonah cursed, then shook his head. It won't mend tonight, we'll walk. 6 miles lay between them and home. The sky deepened with sunset as they walked side by side in a comfortable silence. It was Clara who finally broke it. "I never expected this," she said. "What?" "This life. These children. You." He glanced at her, his voice gentle. "Do you regret it?" She shook her head. "Number." "Just surprised." They paused beneath a cottonwood tree, the wind tangling her hair. Jonah reached out to smooth it back, his fingers briefly brushing her cheek. Both of them froze, the air between them suddenly charged. "I've never shared a bed," she whispered. His eyes held hers. "Then share mine. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but if you ever want more than work and chores, it's yours." Her chest tightened, then softened with a relief she hadn't known she'd needed. "I've known hurt," she said. "So have I. But I won't bring it to you." She searched his face, then nodded slowly. "I believe you." From then on, the quiet air between them carried a new current. That night, she sat at her window watching the stars. When Jonah passed her door, he paused. Clara rose, placed her hand in his, and he brought it to rest against his chest. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he murmured. For the first time in years, she let herself believe it. By late October, frost silvered the pasture, and mornings came sharp and cold. Clara stood on the porch, a shawl pulled tight, her breath clouding in the pale dawn. The door creaked open behind her. "You'll catch cold standing out here," Jonah said. Clara didn't turn at once. "I wanted to see the sky before the smoke from the chimney dims it." He stepped beside her, still fastening the cuff of his shirt. "You always speak like that, soft, peculiar. I never know what words you'll let loose next." She glanced at him. "Would you rather I stop?" "No," he said, his eyes fixed on the pale horizon. "I want to hear the next thing." They stood in silence as dawn broke over the ridge, gold spilling across the frozen pasture. The horses pawed the stiff ground beyond the fence, and the rooster crowed late, as if reluctant to face the chill. "May wants to help in the kitchen now," Clara said. "She asked me to teach her how to make cornbread without burning the edges." Jonah's jaw eased. She used to sit on the counter with her feet dangling in the flour sack while her mama cooked. "I won't make her stop remembering." "I didn't think you would." She started toward the door, but Jonah caught her hand, his voice lowered. "I've been thinking about what I said." Clara froze, her breath shallow. "So have I," she admitted. "I meant it. It doesn't have to be today or tomorrow. I just want you here when the snow comes." Her fingers curled gently into his. "I don't know how to be wanted without being used." He looked down at their joined hands. "Then let me show you." Slow. That morning Clara let May measure the cornmeal and stir the buttermilk with a crooked spoon and all. She didn't scold the mess. At the table, Eli sat carving a scrap of pine with Jonah's pocket knife, his tongue tucked in concentration. After breakfast, Jonah hitched the wagon to fetch fencing wire from a neighbor 20 miles east. Clara wrapped bread and apples in cloth, slipping a folded note inside without his knowing. He would be gone until the following day. That afternoon, Clara showed the children how to press wildflowers between the worn pages of an old ledger. Eli picked a stubborn daisy still clinging to color, while May chose a sprig of sage. Clara wrote their names beneath each plant in careful script. Later, as the light thinned, she pulled the old rocker onto the porch and stitched patches over Eli's torn trousers. May joined her, wrapped in a shawl too big for her shoulders. "Do you like my papa?" the girl asked suddenly. Clara's hands stilled. "Yes, I do, and I think he likes you very much. He speaks softer when you're near." "And—" May's brow furrowed. "He's nicer." Clara smiled faintly, eyes on the fabric. "He's a good man. You could stay forever if you wanted," the child said. Clara's voice was quiet. "I just might." By the time Jonah returned, snow dusted the far ridges. His coat was rimmed with frost where sleet had melted and refrozen. He stomped the slush from his boots and carried the coiled wire toward the barn. "Clara," he called. She stepped out, drying her hands on her apron. "You're late." Got held up behind a herd moving east. Cost me near an hour." "Did you find the note?" she asked. He blinked. "What note?" She wrapped her shawl tighter. I tucked it in your bundle. I wrote that I hoped you'd be back before the snow stuck. He studied her face a long moment. I'd have come back even if it buried the hills. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara waited by the hearth. Jonah sat across from her, elbows braced on his knees. You said once you'd show me slow, she whispered. I think I'd like to start learning. He didn't move at first. Then he rose, crossed the room, and offered his hand. She took it, her fingers light but steady. Together they walked to the small back room that had once been hers alone. Jonah didn't unlace his boots until she had sat and pulled hers off first. He watched every movement like a man memorizing a map. When their shoulders touched on the narrow bed, he asked, Are you sure? She nodded, not because certainty lived in her, but because for the first time in years she trusted the ground beneath her. They lay side by side, not touching beyond what the mattress allowed. Firelight flickered against the walls, and the wind whispered across the eaves. I've never slept beside someone who let me rest, she breathed. I don't want to be anything else, he answered. Clara closed her eyes, and for the first time since Missouri, she slept straight through the night. By mid-October, mornings cut sharper through wool sleeves, and the woodpile shrank faster than Jonah liked. He rose before dawn to split more, frost crackling beneath his boots. From the kitchen window, Clara sometimes watched him while she stirred corn mush for the children. She never said it aloud, but she liked the rhythm of him in the yard, deliberate, steady, strong in a way that spoke of staying. She had grown used to the sound of his boots on the porch steps, the way he wiped his palms on his trousers before lifting a child or brushing her shoulder. She hadn't gone back to her own room. That morning May sat at the table brushing her rag doll's hair with a sliver of bone comb while Eli counted dried beans into a tin cup. I saw a fox by the fence line, May said. Its face was white and its tail bent funny. Did it see you? Clara asked. It stopped and stared like it was thinking. Eli looked up, serious. Maybe it was a spirit. Spirits have wings, May told him, sure of herself. Not if they're foxes, Eli muttered. Clara bent to kiss the crown of his head. Spirit or not, no wandering past the fence line without your father or me. Wild things grow hungry when winter's near. That afternoon, Jonah rode out to help a neighbor drive cattle before the first snow closed the lower trails. He wouldn't return until dusk. Clara used the hours to teach the children how to cut scraps for a quilt she had started piecing together from the trunk at the foot of her bed. I want mine to have stars, May said, sorting fabric. You pick them. I'll help you stitch, Clara told her. Eli squinted at his square. Mine looks like a potato, Clara smiled. A very fine potato. He grinned, satisfied. After the children slept, she sat by the hearth with her mending, waiting for the sound of hooves. Wind rattled the shutters, and she pictured Jonah out in it, coat drawn close, riding through the dark. When he came at last, his cheeks were raw with cold, and snow clung to the brim of his hat. You're late, she said, rising. Had to ride wide around a fallen tree. Horse near stumbled into a ravine. Without thinking, she crossed the floor, unwinding his scarf, brushing snow from his collar. He caught her wrist, held it against his chest. Wasn't sure you'd still be up, he murmured. I don't sleep easy when you're gone. He bent to kiss the inside of her wrist before letting it go. Later, in bed, she turned toward him. Do you ever think of leaving this land? He blinked slow. For what? I don't know. I've just never stayed anywhere long enough to think about staying. He propped himself on one elbow. You want to leave? Number, I just want to know what it feels like to belong somewhere on purpose. You do, he said simply. You belong here because you chose it. She traced the seam of the quilt. And if the winter's hard, we'll get through. If spring brings fire, we'll get through that too. But what if it's me that breaks something? He studied her a long moment. Then I'll help you mend it. She didn't answer, only tucked herself beneath his arm. He held her as if she were precious but not fragile, and she knew deep in her bones he would never ask her to be less than herself. The next morning she woke before the children. The fire had burned low, the room cold, but Jonah's hand was still wrapped around hers. She lay still, listening to the wind scratch at the walls, wondering how a woman like her had ended up in a bed that felt like shelter. She rose quietly and lit the stove, set a kettle to boil. No humming, no words, just steady movements in the kitchen. Reaching for the flour tin, she noticed a folded paper tucked beneath the ledger's edge. It wasn't her handwriting. Unfolding it, she found a land deed, worn at the creases. Her name had been added in careful ink beside his. "You did this," she said as Jonah stepped into the room, hair damp from the pump, shirt half-buttoned. He nodded once. "It's your home, too." She pressed the paper to her chest. "You didn't ask. I figured you'd earned it long before you said yes to me." She walked toward him slowly. "I'll stay through winter," she whispered. He smiled. "Stay through spring, too?" Her hand rose to his jaw. "Through everything." That was enough for him. By November, snow fell and held. Overnight, the valley lay blanketed in white. The children woke early, pressing their faces to the window, breath fogging the glass, while Clara stoked the stove with the last of the dry aspen. Jonah had gone before dawn to help a neighbor drive sheep down from the ridge before the drifts thickened. He'd left a note scrawled in the margin of the almanac, the only paper at hand. Clara found it beside the coffee pot, traced her fingers over the slanted letters, then tucked it behind the flour tin. May and Eli bundled into coats and scarves and tumbled into the yard, chasing each other through the powder. Clara followed, her boots crunching in rhythm behind them. She hung the laundry in the lean-to, breath rising in pale clouds. Then she paused, watching the children build a crooked snow woman with a stick for an arm and a stone pressed in for a mouth. Later, while Eli napped, May sat at the table shaping beeswax into a small horse, tongue pressed to the corner of her lip. "Did you have a mama who taught you things when you were little?" she asked, eyes fixed on her work. "No," Clara said. "Not for long." "What happened?" "She got sick the same year the river rose. Everything changed after that." May looked up. "Did it make you sad all the time?" Not all the time, just in the quiet places." The girl nodded slowly. "Sometimes I feel sad in the quiet, too." Clara reached across the table and brushed a crumb from May's sleeve. "That's how we remember the ones we miss. It doesn't mean we're broken." That afternoon the wind picked up, pushing drifts hard against the barn doors. Clara secured the shutters and brought the hens in early. When she lit the fire that evening, the wood snapped and crackled while the wind sighed through the seams of the house. Eli curled against her side on the rug, clutching the rag doll his mother had stitched before her passing. He didn't speak, just pressed his cheek to Clara's thigh and closed his eyes. Jonah returned after dark, his coat stiff with frozen sleet. Clara met him at the threshold with a towel and dry socks. He didn't speak right away, only stood there, eyes on her face as though something had settled in him during the long ride home. "You're late," she said softly. "I couldn't leave until we got the last flock down off the ridge. Snow was past my stirrups by the time I crossed the creek." She unwound his scarf carefully. "You didn't eat?" "Number." She brought him a bowl of stew kept warm on the stove. He ate at the table while she sat across from him, hands folded in her lap. "I heard from a man in Bozeman," he said between bites. "He's selling a small printing press and a stack of old school books. Belonged to a teacher who passed 2 winters back. Thought maybe May might want them." "Books?" she asked. He nodded. "And a cabinet press small enough to fit in the barn loft." Her head tilted. "You want to teach her to print? I thought you might want to." She leaned back, surprise flickering under her ribs. "You kept that to yourself." "Henry." I wanted to be sure before I said it out loud. She watched him finish his meal, then stood and offered her hand. He took it without a word, and together they walked to the back room. That night, beneath the thick quilt, she turned toward him, voice low. "I used to think I'd spend my whole life never being seen." "You're seen," he said, clear as day. She pressed her forehead to his chest, listening to the steady beat beneath his skin. "You're giving me more than any man ever has." "Aim." "That's because I'm not giving it to you like a trade. You don't owe me anything." She didn't reply, only slipped her hand over his, anchoring herself in the hush. He kissed the top of her head, then whispered, "You ever think you might love me?" She didn't pull away. "I think I already do." He exhaled slowly. as though something long held had finally loosened. The next morning she rose before dawn and wrote a list for the winter stores. She added cloth for book bindings and lamp oil for the loft. When Jonah came in from feeding the stock, she handed him the list without a word. He scanned it, then looked up. "You planning to stay through summer too?" She nodded once. Quiet but sure. "Then I'll double the sugar. May might start baking. She's already asked for pie tins." He folded the list, tucked it into his coat. "I'll ride out tomorrow." She poured water into the kettle. "You'll ride home too, bet." His smile caught hers, always. And when the north wind came howling, it found a house sealed tight with warmth, and a woman who no longer flinched at its sound. By December the snow lay heavy and wet, piling along the eaves, softening the world into a hush. Days passed in quiet rhythm, firewood stacked, stock fed, bread rising slow on the back of the stove. Inside, Clara moved with the ease of belonging. She no longer paused before speaking, no longer hesitated to reach for Jonah's hand when he stepped through the door with snow in his beard and the smell of pasture on his coat. She had learned the slope of his shoulder in sleep, the way he lifted Eli without effort, how he always poured her coffee before his own. That week, Jonah cleared the barn loft, swept it clean, and set the crate with the press beside a small table he had built from leftover planks. Clara ran her fingers across the cool metal. "Reverent. I was 13 the first time I saw one," she said. "My uncle printed notices and wedding announcements. I used to sneak into his shop and press the letters into my palm." Jonah leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You never thought to take it up proper?" "There was never time, and no one asked if I wanted to." He studied her a moment longer. "I'm asking now." She looked back at him, something steadier than surprise in her eyes. "Then I'll learn." Each afternoon after lessons, May climbed the ladder to the loft and helped set type. Her fingers grew black with ink, and she laughed when her first try came out backward. Clara showed her how to space the lines, how to press the platen evenly. Eli, too small to reach the table, sat on a hay bale and read aloud from the primer while they worked. One evening, as the light faded early and the wind rattled the barn doors, Jonah climbed into the loft and handed Clara a folded sheet. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I wrote down last night. Thought you might print it." She unfolded the paper and read silently, a short verse, plain-spoken but warm, about the sound of boots on pine floors and how love could live in the quiet. "You wrote this?" He nodded. "Didn't say I was proud of it, but I am." "Hey." She printed it clean, the ink still tacky when she handed it back. He tucked it into his pocket without a word and kissed her temple before heading down the ladder. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara pulled a small canvas bag from beneath the bed. Inside was a length of blue cotton dotted with tiny ivory flowers, kept untouched since the spring before her first marriage. "I was saving this for a time when I felt certain," she said, holding it up. Jonah sat at the edge of the bed watching her. "And you feel that now?" "I do. You want to wear it for something?" His voice was careful, not teasing. "I want to wear it when we say vows." He didn't blink. "You asking me? I'm telling you I'm ready." He stood and crossed the room, taking her hands in his. "Then we'll speak them in the spring, when the creek runs again. I don't need a preacher, nor do I. Just you and the children, and the land that gave us back our lives. And," she folded into his chest, her voice muffled against him, "you give me more than anyone ever has." He rested his chin on her hair. "You gave me back something I thought was gone." By March, the snow began to melt down the hillsides. Sap ran in the cottonwoods, and the hens laid more regular. Eli lost a second tooth and buried it by the porch to keep it close. May asked to print a story she'd written herself about a fox who built a house of pine cones and taught birds to sing. On the first warm day, Jonah stood in the pasture with Clara, the sun falling gold across the still wet ground. The children gathered wild violets and tucked them into her braid. She wore the blue cotton dress, and he wore the same coat he'd had since before she arrived, its sleeves patched by her own hand. They stood in a circle, just the four of them, and spoke promises out loud. No flourishes, no recitations, only truth in their voices. Jonah said, I will keep you safe and never ask you to be smaller. Clara said, I will walk beside you as long as the road allows. May took both their hands. Now you're a family. And Eli, cheeks smudged with dirt, shouted, forever. Later, after May curled at the foot of the bed and Eli snored softly on the cot beside the stove, Clara sat with Jonah on the porch, wrapped in a quilt. The moon rose over the ridge, full and slow. You ever think where you might have ended if you hadn't sent that wire? She asked. I would have lasted, he said, but I wouldn't have lived. She leaned against him. I used to think love was a thing I couldn't hold. You're holding it now. She looked up, and I'm not letting go. Years later, folks in Bitterroot Valley would say the Harlan place never felt hard like the rest. Something about the way the gates never stuck, or the smell of ink drifting from the barn, or how the children who grew up there spoke plain and kind. May became a teacher. Eli printed wedding notices and birth announcements, and one slim book of stories penned by his sister, bound in cloth and given to every child in the valley. Jonah never left the land. He built an extra room when the grandchildren came and kept a carved wooden fox on the windowsill in memory of a bedtime tale. And every spring morning, Clara still rose early, brewed coffee, and stood on the porch waiting for the sky to open with light. Jonah joined her always. He never brought up the past. She never needed to ask. They had already lived the hardest part. What came next was theirs to keep. Together they grew old with no fear, no doubt, and no more running.